Well, thank you, everyone. We would have been here 15 minutes earlier, but we had an unexpected event in the legislature today. I do want to welcome you, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to be here on this exciting day. Today marks a new dawn for Alberta, for Canada, and for the federation that binds us together into one great nation. Canadians take pride in the fact that our nation is a mosaic and not a melting pot, both culturally and in terms of our government. Canada's provinces and territories are part of a larger whole, but are not subordinate to it. As Albertans, we love our Canada deeply. This is our home, and we are honoured to be contributing members. But the way Ottawa has treated the province, most especially Alberta, is unacceptable. Albertans are demanding action to restore a relationship that respects Alberta's sovereign areas of provincial jurisdiction as defined by the Constitution. The Canadian Constitution was intended to create a respectful union where the provinces would have their own areas of jurisdiction, free from interference, with autonomy over the laws and policies within their provinces' own spheres of influence. Yet this nation has not always operated smoothly. Over the years, there have been a shamefully large number of missed opportunities for shared growth and prosperity between the provinces and the federal government. In particular, a long and painful history of mistreatment and constitutional overreach from Ottawa has for decades caused tremendous frustration for Albertans. In response, we are finally telling the federal government, no more. It's time to stand up for Alberta. Bill 1, the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, is a first step in standing up for Albertans and pushing Ottawa back into its own lane. When passed, this legislation will create a constitutional legal framework for Alberta to push back against federal interference and encroachment. The federal government is actively attempting to landlock our natural resources, penalize our energy and agriculture producers, cut fertilizer use, control the delivery of health, education, childcare, and other social programs with strings-attached funding, and confiscate legally owned firearms. And that's just a few examples. The framework provided under the Act will allow Alberta's Legislative Assembly to identify constitutional concerns with a specific federal program or piece of legislation, and then recommend a measured and appropriate response to prevent or frustrate that federal intrusion. Our province will not enforce unconstitutional or harmful Ottawa policies or laws in Alberta. Albertans come first, always. Importantly, this Act fully respects Indigenous and treaty rights, the Constitution, court decisions, and does not force private citizens or companies to do anything contrary to federal law or policy. It's intended to be fully democratic and transparent. Each proposed use of the Act will require a special motion to be passed in the Legislative Assembly, which will be subject to open discussion, examination, and review. This framework is both a useful tool and a call to action. It is intended to be used selectively, thoughtfully, and towards the goal of fighting federal initiatives which would harm our province, our people, and our prosperity. We expect to table a number of special motions under this Act in the upcoming spring legislative session, dealing with the examples of federal overreach that I just mentioned earlier. Let it be clear, nothing in this bill involves separation, nor does it provide a means to accomplish such ends. Rather, it is a way for this great province to hold the federal government accountable to the constitutional principles that serve as the very foundation of our country's governance. We are proud Canadians, and we are committed to building a strong and united Canada, but we cannot do that from a position of weakness. We must do that from a position of strength that the principles of our Constitution have provided us. Alberta and Canada are both worth fighting for, and that fight is with an out-of-control federal government in Ottawa that sees Alberta and all provinces as its subordinate rather than its partner. We must push back and take a stand. We must protect the rights of Albertans and our great province, and we must stand up for what is right.
Do you have any concerns about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, if that's going to make relations between Ottawa and Alberta more difficult?
Well, I think that the relationships that we have with provinces are critically important at this time. We're facing the most challenging time in human history, probably since World War II. I think that whether or not you're looking at your provincial government or you're looking at your federal government or your municipal government, there's an expectation that we're going to work together, that we're going to find common ground, and that we're not going to play games that divide us. And so I know that our government and all ministers and our entire caucus is focused on having a constructive relationship with Alberta, and we hope that they'll be approaching their relationship with us in the same way.
Is the Sovereignty Act then playing games? Is that, would you?
I think that it's not for me to say whether or not any individual action is. I think it is for us to look at the collective totality of our action and how we're engaging with one another, and asking if it's a constructive way to be moving forward on issues that affect our collective constituents. That we have an obligation in all things to put the interests of the people that we serve first, and at this point in time, really to dial back our partisan interests or how we might exploit divisions between us. That instead, this is a time when it's demanding us to come forward with solutions as productively as possible.
Are you concerned about the Alberta Sovereignty Act? Do you think it's going to make relations between the province and Ottawa worse?
Look, I want to read the Act. I know it's going to be tabled today in the House, and I'm going to repeat what I said last week. I'm deeply concerned by what is the government of Alberta's attack on Canadian unity. I mean, any act that's going to say we're going to cherry pick which laws apply to, which federal laws apply in Alberta, is some sort of opt-out clause that doesn't exist in our federation. And look, I grew up in the Lougheed era when I saw Premier Lougheed, take swipes at the federal government over legitimate grievances that the province had, and the Prime Minister of the day worked it out with the Premier of the day, but inside the context of a strong federation and a stronger Canada. And my appeal to the Premier and to her ministers is let's work together. Alberta is going to lead the country in economic growth over the next 2 to 3 years. I was on the doors last weekend, Tom, and people were not talking to me about sovereignty. They were talking to me about jobs, about indexing, the benefits that they get. They were talking about the Prime Minister's good performance at the inquiries. And quite frankly, they were talking about him being on Drag Race Canada. And like, which international leader is going to do that? It matters to families in my riding. So Sovereignty Act is not on the minds of Albertans.
What do you make of this general Western relations right now? Because we haven't seen the Sovereignty Act be tabled yet. Right now, the Saskatchewan First Act is being debated, which is very similar in spirit.
So I think that if we take a look at Western provinces, and I'll speak for my province of Alberta, we are stronger inside a united federation. I mean, I just made an announcement with Francois-Philippe Champagne 2 weeks ago about Air Products out of Pennsylvania that's coming to set up shop in Northeast Edmonton, a $1.6 billion build that's going to be the largest net zero hydrogen plant in the world, and it's going to be right in our backyard. So I think that we are going to continue to work with the Alberta government, and quite frankly, we're going to keep appealing to them to work together, because that's how the province and the country do better. Merci beaucoup.
We've seen media reports around some potential pieces of the Sovereignty Act, but it would be not responsible on our part to be making comments until we've seen the legislation. My understanding is it'll be tabled towards the end of the day, Ottawa time. We have a constructive and positive relationship on a number of fronts with the government of Alberta. I had the Deputy Premier and Minister of Infrastructure from Alberta in Bucktouche, New Brunswick. 2 weeks ago, we had a great discussion about infrastructure. So we'll look at the Act once it's tabled and have something to say.
Working with Western provinces, we're seeing the Saskatchewan First Act being debated right now, very similar in spirit to the Sovereignty Act. So what is your government doing to try to smooth things over with the West, where we are seeing, your colleague was saying, attacks on Canadian unity?
We're not pessimistic about Canadian unity at all. Our federation remains very strong. Different issues provoke disagreements amongst partners in the federation from time to time. There's a great deal of constructive and positive work that gets done. I have a very cordial and positive relationship with Premier Moe. Legislatures under our constitutional system are sovereign in their own jurisdictions, and provincial governments can table legislation in their own legislatures, and they can debate and adopt that legislation. We'll do the same thing in the Parliament of Canada, but we're not going to get distracted from working on positive things with all the provincial governments, and they can decide what legislation they want to table in their legislatures at whatever time they want.
Do you think that the merger between RBC and HSBC should be allowed to go ahead?
I just saw that reported in the media this morning. I don't have any details on that at all.
A few years ago, Paul Martin rejected the idea of big banks merging.
Yeah, but that was 20-some years ago, and I was a first-term MP, I think, during those discussions. So I'll be interested to see what the analysis would be of this proposed merger that I just saw this morning at the hotel before I left on the news.
I know you haven't,
Yes.
you haven't seen the Alberta Sovereignty Act, but do you think, just generally speaking, is this going to help harm provincial relations with that province's relations with Alberta?
Well, I mean, Premier Smith in her campaign for the leadership offered a number of ideas that she said she would incorporate into legislation if and when she formed a government. So our understanding is that that legislation will be unveiled towards the end of the day, Ottawa time. We're not running around looking for fire alarms and looking for squabbles and hassles. As I say, we have on a number of fronts a positive relationship with the government of Alberta. The Alberta legislature has sovereign constitutional jurisdiction within their own division of powers. So if they propose to legislate things that are properly within the jurisdiction of the Alberta legislature, the people of Alberta and the members of that legislature are responsible for those decisions. I don't sit in the legislature of Alberta. So I'll focus on what I can do in the national parliament. We'll obviously look carefully at the legislation because there were, as I say, reported in a leadership campaign, which doesn't always bring out the most precise policy solutions. There were some discussions about things that may or may not involve federal jurisdiction. So it's important, I think, out of respect for the legislature of Alberta and for Premier Smith's government, that we look carefully at the legislation. And once we've done that, I'll be happy to comment on the specifics of the legislation. But commenting on some leadership campaign that already feels like ages ago, in the face of legislation that apparently a few hours from now, we're getting close to Christmas. I know you're very excited, but it would appear that in a few hours we'll have a chance to see that bill. But even then, it won't have been adopted at 5 o'clock today, Ottawa time. So this is a long road, and we'll continue to have what I think are constructive and positive discussions with the government of Alberta on a bunch of issues that are important to Albertans. This is one signature piece of Premier Smith's leadership, so we'll look at it carefully. Merci.